Hello, everyone. Megan here from Romance by the Book with the lovely Marielle.
Hello.
And our special guest today is Amanda Bouchet, author
Hi.
of our September book of the month, A Promise of Fire. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
We're so excited. We have been Amanda Bouchet stands for a long time. Blame Taylor Sorensen, who also was and is, for introducing, I think she introduced me to this series. And then when your like space Robin Hood stories came out,
Yeah.
then yeah.
Yeah,
Megan
thank
jumped in.
you.
I do. I love that series so much. I can't wait for the rest. It's so
Oh,
good.
I know. I love it too. I am I'm so torn because I'm a slow writer, so going back and forth between two series is hard, but I'm just worried that people are going to forget about Night Chaser in the meantime, and or if they forgot about Kingmaker while I was doing Night Chaser. It's like everybody has to, you know, stay with me even though it takes a while. I hope.
It's fine. We're here.
Definitely.
Thank you.
So I guess
I guess my main question at first is just what made you decide that Cat and Griffin's story needed 3 books? Was that like while you were in the midst of the process, or did you already know that beforehand?
I didn't know it necessarily beforehand, because I don't really plot ahead very much or plan too much in advance. And so it was really while I was writing that I got to a point where I was about 2/3 of the way through writing A Promise of Fire. And I knew that it was either going to be a super heavy, massive, long book, or I had to split it in some way. I guess I could have thought about splitting it into two, but at the time I don't even think I knew duologies existed. So I was like, well, it's either one or three. So I decided to do the trilogy, because I mean, each book is already pretty long. They're all over 100,000 words, book 1, 2, and 3. Book 2 is the longest. And it, I was a debut author. I'd never been published before. Nobody had heard of me. I didn't have a book deal. And I thought it would be really, really hard to get an agent and a publisher with like an 900-page fantasy romance,
Right.
when nobody had ever heard of me. So I wrote the first book, and I said it would be a trilogy, and we sold it as a 3-book deal.
I'm
So.
curious too if it was in your head, if you started off writing like I'm going to write a fantasy or I'm going to write a romance or both, because it's so much both. Like it's a fantasy adventure 100%, but it's also 100% romance. Um, did you start off with an idea one way or the other, or were you like writing all the
That's a
things?
great question because it wasn't clear for me either. Strangely enough, my first dabblings in writing, it was all romance, but it was more on the paranormal side. And it was, I mean, I went into it thinking this is a romance and it has these paranormal elements. And then I read Maria V. Snyder's Poison Study series, and I absolutely fell in love. And I thought, wow, I want to do something like that. And that's more fantasy with an element of romance. But being a romance reader and a romance lover, as soon as I started writing and I got the 2 main characters on the page, I was like, yeah, this is an all-out romance. It's never going to happen any other way. And so I kind of abandoned the idea of having sort of a lighter romantic thread, and I just went all for it. I was like, yes, this is a romance. It's also a fantasy, and I struck the balance that I am happy with in the end, which is really it's 100% of both, like you said.
Yeah. I mean, I find that like Maria Vale is also somebody who writes like hers are a paranormal of sorts, but it's also 100% a romance.
Mhm.
But it's like it just makes for a really kind of you. I don't know if it's a unique mix. Like I feel like the story ends up being unique because it's both things
Fully both.
at the
Yeah.
same time. Yeah.
Yeah, I love Maria Vale's books. They're amazing, and and I agree. I think you get everything in these books. You get the high stakes, you get the emotion. So both are amped up to their highest level because it's the fantasy adventure, but it's also the romance and the evolution of the relationships, and not just the romantic relationships. It's really important to have relationships outside of the main character's romance as well.
Mhm.
Friendships found family is one of my main themes throughout my books usually.
Yeah, definitely in Night Chaser, that's a big theme too. So yeah, I can see that.
Definitely. We form a team and they become the family. Whether, you know, most of the time, it's not that it's funny because I have a wonderful family and, you know, I don't know why I tend to write like family. The actual
The
blood
terrible
family is not the
family.
ones that
Yeah.
you want. It's the people you choose rather than the ones you're born to. But I mean, that's not coming from anywhere personal. It's just, you know, what I've chosen to write because I think it solidifies these relationships for the characters. They've chosen each other and it's not just happenstance. It's like they're bonded through experience and choice and everything.
Yeah. And so did you always know like how you were going to end book one? Because Marielle and I talked about this where it's really like the beginning of book two could just be like the next chapter. Like it's very like you're still right there in the same place. And so I'm curious how you decided like where to cut that.
Well, I'm not a personal fan of horrible cliffhangers that leave people really upset because as a reader, I hate that. And I would never really want to do it as a writer because especially if you don't have the book ready to go, like if it's not going to be published 2 or 3 months later, then I think it's just kind of mean. So the choice was instead of one more chapter in book one and then ending on a horrible cliffhanger where everything's gone to shit.
Yeah.
To leave it at a nicer spot, you know, with a hopeful, it's kind of, you know, a conclusion in a way. It's got a hopeful, happy for now, we're going forward with things. And then kind of like all things go to heck in the beginning of the second
chapter
book,
one of the second book. Yeah.
Because I did not want to put that in the beginning, in the end of
that.
book.
For real.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
You're welcome. And I mean, because obviously it's a romance. And I don't also, as a reader, appreciate the misunderstandings that drag out forever and keep the characters apart. So I didn't do that either. I mean, we got over the misunderstanding and moved on from there to the greater adventure and more romance. So yeah, that was the decision there. I just didn't want to leave us on that horrible cliffhanger. And if I'd written more and more, it would have just been like, where does this book stop? You know?
Right.
It would have just been book 1 and 2 together, I guess, because there was so much that happened in book 2. But we were like, it was interesting, like, because we did talk like at the right when we finished reading, and you were like, okay, so I have many questions. Like, we're happy right this moment, but I feel like anything could happen. And I was like, oh, it does.
Yeah. Well, you kind of know because you're at the end, you're like, wow, he still doesn't know who she is. So obviously,
and there's someone in the castle who clearly, there's one person
and
in the castle
reader,
ready to.
It's not really supposed to be a secret for the reader anymore. The reader has probably figured out who she is. It's just only Griffin that still doesn't know. And so there's that tension of, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when he finds out? Because, you know, his main sticking point is loyalty, you know, and so to him, her lying to him this whole time or omitting the truth, you know, stabs the sword into his, you know, loyalty issues where he wants. So he sees that as her being disloyal. And that's why, for me, that's why he goes so crazy in the beginning of chapter 2. It's not because he doesn't love Cat or doesn't want to, you know, make a life with her. It's just that the fact that she didn't tell him the truth all that time means she didn't trust him, which means their loyalty is not solid like he thought it was. Yeah. And you know, that for me, that was the issue there. I've had a lot of complaints about that first chapter though.
I will say that for me, like, I'm not somebody who in real life or in fiction can really handle like somebody completely like losing it like that. But I did read it like panic almost. Like he is very he was all in with Cat from kind of very early.
Yeah.
And she spends a lot of time, like even once she likes them and is like becoming endeared to people or even falling in love with Griffin, she's very like, nope, I am not part of your team. You did kidnap me. This is not, you know, so I think he she has not really let him forget for a large part of the book that she was not there. She didn't choose to
by
be there.
choice. Yeah.
And so
No,
I
it's
think,
yeah.
yeah, so I felt like that probably was like a sore spot for him anyway.
It's part of his, yeah, his, I don't know if it's exactly guilt, but I mean, he obviously does know. And later on in book 3, actually, they have a conversation about that and how he's like, I was stupid and I should have done things differently, but that's how it went down. So we can't change the past. But yeah, I mean, I think that was part of it too. Like he knows she didn't go into things exactly the right way, and now she's still holding secrets from him when he, like you said, is all in. He's been all in from the beginning. Yeah, it was mainly just flipping out, but it wasn't meant to be the end, even in his head, it was just flipping out. I flip out. I tend to flip out fast and then get over it fast. So maybe that was.
But he flipped out, and then it's like, I feel like
but
he realized he was like losing it and was like, I need to step out of this
Right, like, "I can't even look at
situation.
you, I'm leaving." Yeah.
And then, yeah, and then
She
it
took
was,
that a whole further than how he meant it.
yeah, it was, yeah. So I mean, we'll say there was like 20 pages or so where there's a bit of a misunderstanding, but in the grand scheme of like a 450-page book, 20 pages is not too long for the issues to go on.
yeah, well, and it is like, I think I've, as much as like a fantasy world is believable, it is believable to me the way that their relationship kind of progresses and how things turn, like how things go from, you took me from my home to like, oh no, this is where I belong.
Yeah.
It wasn't because I think sometimes I have trouble if the characters like forgive each other before I forgive.
Yeah.
Like sometimes the character's like, oh, it's okay. And I'm like,
And
it is
you're like,
not okay.
"No,
I
not
know.
okay."
I love how the cat makes him pay for his bad initial decisions, like
Yeah.
for so long, like 300 pages.
Yeah. Well, and she's friendly with the rest of Beta team.
Mhm.
And we should, I guess, talk about how like there's a long, not a long, but like a big part of the book where they are traveling. And so we get to know Carver and Cato and Flynn, who are like Griffin's small team of like his right hand men. And she relaxes around the rest of them much sooner than she does Griffin. And I
Yeah.
think Griffin, there's some parts where he's just like because she's like joking with someone, but with him she's like, nope.
Yeah, with
Yeah.
him, she's still standoffish. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was fun.
Well, she's punishing him, which she should. And also she's attracted to him. So she's scared of that and pushing him away for that reason too.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny
Yes.
because, like, somebody who had a typical childhood, unlike Kat, would probably consider that to be like a brotherly relationship between the other guys. But of course, for her, siblings are not a good thing. So she doesn't think about it like that, at least not at first.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Well, and when they try to include her, she's like, nope,
Yeah.
which is very funny. Same with her circus family, which is interesting that you introduce us to Kat there, because no, like she hasn't told anybody who she really is. So as the reader, it's like I'm starting off and she's keeping secrets from even the people who are like her adoptive family and closest
Mhm.
friends. And
Yeah.
you're just like, oh, they don't know who you are? That's weird. Until she starts accidentally, spilling things. But it's interesting that you started us off there with her kind of physically in disguise, but also in disguise, like in other ways.
Mhm.
And we see Griffin like see her early on, but it's not until later that we realize like really that how much he had been seeing her or on the lookout for her
Yeah.
even before that.
Yeah.
That's what's fun about the bonus scenes in the new edition of A Promise of Fire, because you get to see Griffin's point of view, and there's a scene where he sees her months before she sees him, and he's just like, "That's the one." So for him going into that whole scene also in the beginning, it was like no doubt in his mind that this was it, and she'll come with him and that'll be that. And when it doesn't go as planned, he makes the, terrible executive decision to just like tie her up with a rope and haul her off.
He's like, this is what needs to happen. I am very sure.
I'm going to make it happen. Yeah.
But the same thing, I mean, it was like, there's a lot of fate and destiny. It's a fated mates story. So, the gods have been, because if anyone listening doesn't know, there's a lot of Greek mythology in the books. And so the gods have been pushing Griffin towards Cat. And then once they're finally in the same place together, Cat starts slipping up. She's never told anyone all her secrets, but all of a sudden they're like kind of popping out. And in my mind, as the writer anyway, that was the gods on her side. So they push Griffin towards Cat, but then Cat is kind of not acting the way she wants to act or should, or has always acted, to hide her identity and everything. And it's sort of coming out of nowhere. And she's even mad at herself. She's like, what is happening here?
Like, I just said my whole name. Why did I do that? Like, talking to the kid. Yeah.
So it's like, fun. It's coming out of her because there's a push from the gods on that side and a push on Griffin's side. So, it takes a little while and a little cajoling and several fights, but.
And that's actually one of my favorite parts and made me laugh so much when they're like making out and they're about to have sex for the first time. And she's like wanting to pull back again. And finally her godfather's like, hello, like, this is your present. Are you turning down your present? How dare you? And she's like,
get away from me.
They want me to have sex. I got it. Like,
kind of like, get out of my bed though,
Right. Like, could you not be here? Thanks.
Yeah, that exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah, she's too stubborn for her own good. And sometimes, Poseidon just has to pop into her head and say, do it.
I've led you here. It was on purpose. Do the thing.
Yeah. Although that does feel very on brand for Greek gods, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, true.
I wondered, speaking of Greek gods, how you decided in what ways you would incorporate Greek mythology. I feel like when you read, as I read the series, I started to look for like, wait a minute, there must be somebody here is hiding somebody. Like I kept not in the beginning, but by the time I got to probably like the end of the second book, beginning of the third book, I was trying to figure out if somebody was hiding, because it became clear that they had been kind of like pushing things around in her life for such a long time, like for her entire life. And she didn't know, and we didn't know at the beginning. But things start to kind of come together. Like I think my first inkling maybe was with Cerberus. And when it was like, oh, he hasn't been here since you left. And I was like, okay. Then I started looking at all the people like, who are you guys?
Well, there's definitely some stuff, but I don't want to give anything away. You kind of need to get to book 3. So Megan hasn't read that one yet. So in Her on Fire, yeah, so Marielle knows that there are some big reveals in the beginning of that book.
But you look back, like once you figure out what's like kind of what's what, you can look back and kind of be like, wait, so when did you, because it's 3 books, you said you don't plot very much. So how did you decide where you're going to be hiding stuff, or did you just like accidentally hide things?
Some of it might have been accidental, but I think by the end of book 1, I knew who was who.
Okay.
So yeah, the identities wasn't accidental anymore, but sometimes and luckily I had time to, in my edits, I was able to go back and add a few things that were kind of key to pulling book 1 into book 2 and book 2 into book 3, or books 1 and 2 into book 3. So actually the rewrite is really important for me, because I don't necessarily plot too much out ahead of time. And then once I know the whole story, I go back for my rewrite, and then I can tie things in. As I'm rewriting, I'm like, if I could just add 2 words here or 2 sentences here or 1 sentence, it'll tie in nicely with something that I know now I know happens later on. So I know I did that all throughout the trilogy, and tied things back in. Or I remember something from the second book, and when I'm looking for what happens next in the third book, I can be like, I can tie that in. So sometimes the tying in goes forward, and sometimes it goes backwards. It's a mix.
I was like, she's a genius.
No, actually, that's the right answer.
That's just like, obviously. So do you have a favorite book of the 3, either the writing process of it or just the story itself? Like, do you have a favorite of the 3?
Well, I love A Promise of Fire, the first book, because it's the introduction to the characters, and there's the enemies to lovers aspect and the romantic tension, which is so fun to build up. But I think book 2, Breath of Fire, is actually my favorite in terms of how the characters evolve and the writing. Like, there were tons of action scenes, lots of battles and bloody adventures, and and they're actually really hard to write. And there's a lot of sex scenes too. In retrospect, I might have been able to pull back a tiny bit on that, but while I was writing it, it just felt like I was going for it. So both of those, both sex scenes and battle action scenes, are really hard to write. You know, I go over them over and over and over until they're just as smooth as I can make them, and it's exciting on both sides as I can make them. So there was a ton of that, and I was really happy with how it turned out in the end. And I love the way Cat and Griffin's relationship solidifies and evolves in that book, and how Cat herself as a character, she begins to open up, to trust people, to decide that maybe trust and love is a strength instead of a weakness. And she really makes leaps and bounds of progress in the second book, which then she can make concrete and put into action in the third book. So I think in terms of all that, it's very close to my heart.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love the family dynamic of Griffin's family when she first comes into it in A Promise of Fire is like anathema to her, because she's like, these people love each other? Like, what?
How weird is that?
So I loved that. Like, she really does not just come to understand like him more, but like his world, and the fact that the way she grew up is in 0 ways normal, and she needs to just like cut it off.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it is kind of interesting, because I feel like that happens in real life, where you like, and especially when people get married, I think, or like have a partner, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, no one else does this thing that my family always did and I thought was totally normal, and every person did it. Okay.
For sure.
So I think when Griffin was telling her, like when she realized that Griffin in any other circumstance would have been alpha, but he let his sister be alpha because she's nicer and like people enjoy her more, she was like, what? And then she meets the family, and she's like, I just that dinner where she was like, well, you would be killing him and you would be over here. Like, I was like,
and you would get eaten alive.
Family's like,
you
what?
Poor thing. Yeah.
And there's she's such a shock to them too. They're all like, oh, like, wow.
Right. Well, this explains a lot about you too, right? Like, as soon as she starts talking, you're like, oh, I get it now. Got it. Thanks.
And what's fun about Kat's character too is how on the inside she's thinking, wow, she's kind of interested. Like, you know, maybe she doesn't hate that so much, but on the outside she's just all sour, you know, lemons and vinegar.
Kiss and vinegar, as my grandma would say. Yeah.
So, and it's fun watching her evolve out of that as well, but it lasts long enough that it, you know, it's a fun, that was so fun to write. I love that part. What I absolutely love about Kat is the 2 levels that she's on, like inside her head and what she actually spews from her mouth. And
Yeah.
I think that was the
Then
thing I
she's
love
like,
most
wait,
about
was that too much? But she's still leaning right in. You're
Yeah.
like, okay.
Yeah, she's committed. I mean, she is committed to being a sourpuss for but
For
it's so
sure.
funny because you know she's so soft and loyal and loving on the inside and will do anything to protect the people she cares about. So that's what, like I said, I love about her characters. Those
Yeah, because it
two
was so dangerous
sides.
for her to show that in her old life. And so now she's scared of showing it in the new life, even though all the people in her life are different. So yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I felt like during their trip, like the times when they were attacked or things that she's like, let me fight with you. And they're like, nope, we're gonna tie you to this here rock. And she's like, well, I hope you die then. Like I just I was like, oh, well, that took a turn. And then they come back and she's like dragged the rock over so she could see. And she's just like, well, I was just hoping that you would get killed and I could get out of here. I was like, wow.
Unless she kept testing the rope, because the
Yeah.
magical rope would have, like, the magic would have stopped if Griffin died. So she kept just like tugging on it.
Yeah.
And she's like, I'm not relieved that they're back. I am sad and upset. You're like, okay. All right, Kat.
That's so funny because that whole scene got amped up hugely after the first rounds of edits. That was one of the things my editor said. She's like, we need to see Griffin and the beta team strengths more. And so at first I just had Kat, waiting. She didn't see anything. And then boom, they come back and, okay. And that whole scene was rewritten so that we could see them through Kat's eyes and see them actually being capable, warriors.
Yeah.
And then there was the added, the romantic tension and the Kat wanting to escape, and how that's between her. That's like a tug of war between her. She wants to escape, but she kind of doesn't want them to die either. So it's like, so yeah, that was a great.
It's fun because she told them how to defeat it was a giant at that point, and she was like, she told them how. Then she's watching them, and she's like, they need to do when they come back. She's so grumbly, why
I lost my knives, and you couldn't do this, and you couldn't do that.
Yeah, you've lost.
Not leaving here without my knives. It was, I was like, wow,
she's the best. I love it so much.
She's a great character to write and to read. I hope so.
Yeah, she's very fun to read. Well, and that's a thing too that I think a lot of writers I think have a hard time, and I feel like sometimes readers will be like, this person is not likable, and so I feel like it didn't feel to me anyway like you were worrying about whether people were gonna like Kat or not. She didn't seem to worry about whether people she probably preferred if people didn't like her too terribly much. But I think it made me anyway love her more because she was just so grumpy and
acerbic. Yeah.
Yes. And she's definitely kind of immature in the beginning as well. And that's part of her process is also growing up. The immaturity is a bit of a defense mechanism also. So she can just get away with being so grumpy. And I like that evolution. She really, really grows up and herself and in her relationships. But there was a reviewer once who described Kat as her Slytherin heroine. So, there's kind of the dark edges to her, but still, a heroine in the end. So I thought that was pretty appropriate. She is kind of she's not your Gryffindor, she's not your Ravenclaw or whatever. She's your Slytherin heroine.
Yeah, she does seem like it served her very well in her life to be to not be trusting, to not let people in, to that has saved her life before. And now she's in a position where she doesn't have to do that, but she does not know what to do with herself.
Yeah.
With this group of people who really care about each other and would never consider murdering their
random
sisters
people.
or whatever.
Or random people. Or their sisters.
Yeah. I mean, she's just oh, I don't, it seems reasonable to me that it would take her a while to like figure out how to deal in that situation.
Well, she has
Or
to believe it's true to,
Right.
it's kind of like, you can't just tell someone how it is, you have to show them. And it takes a while. He tells her at first and she's like, yeah, bye-bye, I don't need you, you know? And
Yeah.
it's only through seeing it, the actions and how people are with each other, that she finally understands that that's a reality that she could maybe like if she opens herself up.
And I think she has to figure out that like all the things that, like you said, Marielle, that served her in her life before are doing her a disservice now. And she has to cut ties. And until she feels like that's a realistic place where she's at, she like can't make herself do it. And so
Mhm.
I really liked that, because it was like, yeah, it's like a constant tug of war within her. And it's like obvious that these people want to love her and she's like not letting them. So not even just Griffin, like the guys of Beta
Mhm.
Team and Griffin's sisters and everybody, like, and
Mhm.
she finally just has to let it go. Yeah, it was
Well,
so great.
you can't just unlearn behavior, overnight, or because someone tells you this is the way it could be. It takes in, real life and in fiction, if it's going to be realistic.
Yeah.
It takes a while, and some things are never unlearned. You can't totally override certain things. So I think that's what makes Cat and Griffin realistic, because Griffin, the thing that makes him flip out every time is about loyalty. It's also the issue with Pierce.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
which you will see, Megan, coming up
Yes.
soon.
I
Pierce
know,
is
I
just
know.
the-
Well, I know it's coming because, like, yeah, they had his second with them in book 2, and bad things happened to her. So I knew that they were cruising for that clash. But I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's so this was interesting too with Griffin's family. Like the parents were super sweet, and you could see like, okay, this is why they have made babies who have grown up into like really like stellar human people.
Mhm.
But they all have their own personalities and their own points of view and their own like not agenda, but they definitely have their own way that they see the
Mm.
world around them and like what should happen in the world around them. Like, I
Mhm.
feel like
That's really true. Yeah.
it's really fun to see that in
Mm.
a family and how that turns, like how the dynamics are, because sometimes they don't always agree on either how to do things or what needs to happen. And
It
then
was a big family, and also with Beta Team and an extended big family. And I don't want them to be interchangeable. You can't just be like, oh, who's this, which one, So they all really had to have their own unique personalities to make them stand out. Because when you've got a big cast of characters, otherwise they kind of all blend together.
Yeah.
yeah, it was fun to see. And I thought, I guess that is the thing that I was curious about too, because like you're building like a whole
World.
yeah, I mean like multiple countries, all these like different there's layers too, because it's like the pantheon of gods is there, and we don't see them all from the start, but we do like cross paths with them, or they're people, and they interact with the world, but the world that Cat and Griffin are living in is also made up of several different countries and people, like layers of um aristocrats and like soldiers and all different kinds of people,
And magic versus no magic, and
Mhm.
yeah.
yeah, and like people who are like, there's like magic drugs and magic, like there's all different things going on, and I was curious how you decided like how much of the world to show us in each, because we start off learning like a little bit, even with the
Mhm.
circus we learn some things, but it never feels like you're like, let me tell you about this world, which is nice. There's a lot to
I think
learn.
the guaranteed way to make readers stop is to spend 10 pages telling them about the world.
Yeah.
Well, I think it worked to my benefit that I just kind of flew by the seat of my pants as I wrote the first book, because things came in as I needed them. I needed something from a god or from mythology or whatever. So then I put it in. So there was never really a temptation to dump a whole bunch of information at once. And it just happened really organically. Whenever I needed it for the plot or the action scene or the development of the characters or any part of the book, then that's when I pulled something in. And I just kind of muddle around on Google and Wikipedia for a little while and find the right thing that fit, or I'd have an idea and I'd be like, oh yeah, but then I go make sure, I could use it, because like my books are definitely not a retelling of Greek mythology, and I don't even stick to the traditional mythos. I take the Greek mythology as we know it, but then transform it to use in my world. It's other events and the gods are acting on the characters in the book and on the events, but it's in their own way. And they know about myths and legends because there's been communication between worlds. So I can talk about things like what happened to Sisyphus and Tartarus, or what happened to Jason and the Golden Fleece in Attica, which is our world. Because there's communication between the worlds through gods and magical creatures. So they have these myths and legends that are built up, so I can use them. But then what's actually happening in our world, our fictional world, is brand new. So I don't have to, just take a myth and retell it. I can just make up a new one. But using the characters, the creatures, and everything from Greek mythology. That was really fun too.
Yeah, it was fun to read because it was clearly not our world, but it was also like the Greek gods and the way that they acted and the way that they, handled things seemed very like on brand for
and interfered
God's word.
Also.
Yes, familiar. And that's why I chose Greek mythologies. I thought there's a good chance that most readers would be somewhat familiar with some of the gods, the creatures, and some of the history in there. And it just it streamlined the writing. You don't have to explain who Poseidon is. I mean,
someone could look that up.
And his lightning bolt, like I think the majority of readers are already gonna have an image of that in their head. So then again, the info dump. If I'd made up God, XYZ or whatever, then you have to explain more. Whereas in this case, I didn't need to. And then Greek mythology, fantasy romance has become super popular anyway. So yay.
Yeah.
Ahead of the curve.
Because it was written in like 2000 I started writing in like 2000, and the first one was published in 2016, 2017, and 2018. So this is already, although we have our beautiful reissued covers and everything. So, and then the new book coming in like not even 2 weeks. It's October 4th.
So exciting.
I know. Oh my gosh, let me just show this off because it is so pretty.
It's so pretty.
It's beautiful. I did want to ask you, because this is a spin-off, because we're going to be in new people's heads. How did you decide, like, because I feel like a lot of romance particularly would have been like Cat and Griffin's POV, and then change, like, trilogies in romance tend to be like a couple
Different
and then another couple and another couple. And you did not do that, which, I mean, it was good. I was very happy to see their relationship like progress over time. But it was
I'm a total rule breaker when I don't follow the rules of,
Did you ever consider it though? Like, were you ever just like, should I, or did you just go, no, this is the story, that's what I'm doing?
Totally, the entire original trilogy, the 3 books, I always plan on doing from Cat's point of view, first person, present tense. That was it. I did enjoy writing a few scenes from Griffin's point of view, but I had no intention of doing dual point of view. But I wanted the spin-off series to stand out differently, because it's not the tone, and a lot of things are different about it. And it's also no longer, Cat and Griffin's story, even though it's very closely related. So another way to make that stand out was to switch to dual points of view and third person past tense. So it's like, whew, totally flipped it on its head.
Okay.
But, and it's weird because, so we're calling Cursive Queens Kingmaker book 4, only it's a trilogy. So it's like, how can you have a trilogy and then a book 4? Like, what's going on there? So we kept it under the umbrella of the Kingmaker Chronicles series, but calling it book 4 because it's so closely related, but it is technically like a continuation. It's a spin-off, like it's not the same, it's different. But basically it picks up like a few months after Heart on Fire leaves off. So like the other books, it's like boom, boom, boom. It's right in the continuity. It's just now we've switched to Jocasta and Flynn's point of view, and we've switched to third person past tense, which I'm sure some readers who read straight through will be like, what?
Yeah.
But I did the same thing
I'm
in
excited.
Night Chaser, I wrote it, 3/4 from Tessa's point of view. In first person, was it present or past? I don't even remember now.
Yeah,
and
past, but I don't remember.
It's been a while since I read that.
Yeah, I wrote it and I don't remember. So and then Shade came in with a point of view, like, but only, he only got about a quarter of the book, or maybe a third in his point of view. And then book 2, Starbreaker, I did dual points of view, equal viewing time. And that was symbolic because he was on the outside looking in on book 1 and he's on the inside, like, part of the team.
Yeah.
In book 2. So, and I know readers are like, what is she doing?
So you just like making your life hard. That's what you're saying.
What's that?
You like making your own life hard. That's what you're saying.
I do. Yeah. It's hard to switch back and forth too, because you're like, you forget what tense you're in, and then you write maybe some pages and you're like, oh shoot, and you have to go back.
Right.
But mostly I keep it straight. But it's mainly just I don't feel like following any specific rule. I want to do what's right for the book and the characters. And so I do what I feel is most representative of the story and their story that I want to tell.
That's awesome.
I mean, it's always worked for me, so I'm not at all complaining. I think it's interesting to see how you do it.
Yeah. Well, we have questions that we always ask our authors when they come on with us. And mine is, what is your favorite trope to read?
Fake relationship. I do love enemies to lovers. It's a very close second. But I love a fake relationship.
Same. I do love that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're a lot of fun when they're like, nope, no feelings here.
Yeah.
You're like, sure.
Like, pay no attention to the man behind
the
curtain.
You're real convincing. I like a fake relationship when other people are like, are you sure this is fake? And because there's always like a point where somebody's like,
yeah, trying
there's like, he's not looking at you like he thinks it's fake. Yeah. It's super fun.
That's fun. My question that I usually ask people, which I think I've asked you before, if we were a fly on the wall when you were in the middle of your writing process, what would we see?
You would see me talking out loud the entire time.
Okay.
Which is why I need to be in a quiet room alone with nobody really around me, because I'm literally just talking the entire time. I'm usually talking what I write.
I was gonna say, do you like test out the dialogue? Is that what you mean by talking?
No, I'm not dictating. I'll usually write like a paragraph or a few sentences or a page maybe, but I don't ever just write from A to Z. Like, that's not my style. I go back, I circle back a lot. And as soon as I circle back, I start reading out loud. There's a lot of reasons
cafes, no writing in cafes for you.
Oh my God, I would hate that, because I just want to be alone and I want to say my words out loud and hear how they sound. And that'll tell me a lot. Like, if the sentence is right, if it sounds right, if I need to change it, if I need to move it down here instead or flip things around. That's part of my process, is reading out loud.
Nice.
I do that when I write reviews, so that's so interesting to hear that from somebody else. I like that.
Oh, me too. I like it. I'm usually totally alone in my obsession with reading
Like
reading
I
back.
like write the whole thing, and then afterward I go back and read it out loud to make sure, like you said, like, wait, maybe this part should be up here, and kind of like, yeah, so that's interesting. I love that.
Me too. Yeah. And I
Teacher.
really think hearing it makes a difference. Just reading it is not the same.
Yeah.
I feel like your brain can editorialize and like fix things for you when you're reading silently.
Mm-hmm.
And when you read out loud, all of a sudden you're like, oh, is
You're
there a
like, oh,
word
that doesn't go
missing? Or
there.
that's,
Yeah.
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 Totally. Yeah, it's like
Definitely.
editing your own paper, you know, it's like, you know what it's supposed to say,
Mhm.
so you don't see when something's wrong.
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I've
Isn't
also
that a phenomenon where you'll like fill in, like if
Oh
they show
yeah,
people like a
there should be
picture
an
of,
or a the, and you've left it out.
Yeah.
I actually discovered, probably everybody else knew about this, but I didn't. If you on Word, if you go to the review part, there's a read aloud thing, and it's actually the voice of I called. Well, I had a male voice before. I called him Bob. Now it's so Bob literally read A Curse of Queens back to me. I had already read it several times and out loud as well. But then at the very end, Bob read this whole book back to me. And there were a few things that Bob caught because, you know, when it's supposed to be through, but you've written though, you know, the R.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the kind of things
that Bob got.
That's
that
so
Bob
smart.
got
Yeah,
for
because as
me.
soon as you hear it, you're like, oh, that's wrong. Like,
Yes. And
immediately.
then you're like,
Bob-
you know, pause.
Does
And you
Bob
go
read
fix
it
it.
in like the most boring possible way so you can be like,
Computer voice.
yeah.
Well, they've improved it. I don't know. I think I updated Word, and now I've got a female's voice that sounds a bit more natural. And what was
cool.
funny about Bob is there were several words that he could not pronounce correctly. Grimace, like, and I apparently write grimace a lot. Like she grimaced, he grimaced, and he'd say grimaced, grimaced. I was
I
like,
crack
Bob,
up
it's
when my
grimace.
GPS does that on like a road name. When I like, because I've lived here in this area like pretty much my whole life, and it'll say a road name, and I'm like, oh no, that's
No.
wrong.
And there were lots of words like that. Oh, and Thaleria, the name of the world. Bob insisted it was Thaleria.
Valeria.
They were like,
Yeah. So I had to just let Bob go because I couldn't correct him. But yeah, that was really helpful. And I haven't named the lady voice yet. I have to do that.
Before the next book.
I know.
So if you want to, you can tell us like what you're working on now, or I know we just talked about the book that's coming next, which is very exciting, but I didn't know if you were in the midst of another already or if you're in between.
No, I am. I've started. So A Curse of Queens, which comes out in October, is what we're calling Kingmaker Book 4.
Mhm.
And I am about 100 pages into Kingmaker Book 5.
Oh, yay.
So there's definitely a follow-up after that, after A Curse of Queens. And it will be very obvious where things are going when readers get to the end of A Curse of Queens. The last
Okay.
30 pages or so, you are there's huge reveals about lots of things that people want to know, including who will be the main characters of the next book and where it's going to be set, which is a little different also.
Exciting.
So readers have to
That's
have
awesome.
to read A Curse of Queens,
Yes.
which is a hefty book. It's like 460 pages or something.
Yes.
And there'll be lots of big reveals and surprises towards the end.
So, and you've got a like novella that is Pierce, and that is that comes kind of in between, right? But
so,
theory,
yeah, basically it's pretty much simultaneous in timeline wise as A Curse of Queens. So you could read it before A Curse of Queens or after A Curse of Queens. Ideally, it would be read before the book 5 that I'm working on now. But that, you know, I don't have even a date set for that yet. So there's time to read the novella. I like to think of it as after the original trilogy, so you can find out what happens to Pierce right after Heart on Fire and then go into A Curse of Queens. But basically, in my head, the timeline is that they're happening pretty much simultaneously, but in different places. So we don't, you know, they don't overlap in that way.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. We love having you.
Aww,
where can people find you?
On the internet.
Well, Instagram, Amanda Bouchet is it author Amanda Bouchet or Amanda Bouchet author? I can't even remember, but Amanda Bouchet, you'll find me author before or after. So Instagram, Facebook, I have an author page. I'm on TikTok, which is having a steep learning curve, but I'm doing my best. And I've just had the frustrating, well, I did some research today because I was like getting frustrated with TikTok. And it turns out because I'm in Europe and I created my account in Europe, it's only pushing my content out to Europe. Because every time I look at my video data and I'm like, you know, biggest views are in France and Germany, Italy, Spain, not even the UK, you know, where I have lots of English, you know, my books are in English.
Right.
And I do have books in French and in German, but my, you know, my main readership, 98%, we're going to say, is in English, and especially in the US. And then my US views are like 6% of, you know, 2%.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, oh, I can't, you know. So I finally did some research, and it's because I created the account in Europe with a French phone number, and it only pushes my content out to continental Europe. So if anyone who's watching this is on TikTok and would like to follow me and like and comment on some videos, it could maybe help me get some traction where I need it. So please do. And Twitter, although I'm rarely on Twitter, I have to say, but I am there if that's where you like. And BookBub, it's nice to have followers there because that's where I do some book recommendations. I have a Facebook reader group, so you can go to the page and then join the reader group as well. That's called All Booked Up with Amanda Bouchet. So I'm pretty much on all the usual platforms.
If you search, you will find her.
If you search that, and my website lists all of them except for maybe TikTok. I haven't updated that with that info yet, maybe.
But so on our, if you were watching this today, on our in the link in our bio, you can get links to Amanda's website, also to pre-order A Curse of Queens, and book recommendations that she gave to us. So
yes,
there you go.
So
this was so nice,
everyone. Thank you so much. We love your books. We love you. We're so glad to have you.
I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you both so much. You're wonderful and such great supporters of all books and authors and of me. And I appreciate it.
Thank you. Everyone, we'll see you next month. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.